And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Tuesday, November 19th. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate, get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. It makes the show more lively, more entertaining between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. We appreciate your guys' viewership each and every day, so any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also, the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So, let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So, we're going to start off the show. We're going to talk about last night's game between the Texans and the Cowboys. The Texans winning that game 34-10. So we'll talk about that. Some of the top performances from that game as well. Then in the second part of the show, I know I touched upon it a little bit yesterday, but we'll get into talking about the Giants' decision to bench Daniel Jones and to start Tommy DeVito. So we'll be seeing Tommy Cutlets once again as the Giants are coming out of a bye week. They will be facing the Buccaneers, who are also coming out of a bye week as well. We'll get into talking about the 49ers and their loss to the Seahawks and how they're kind of in trouble. We'll get into that. We'll also talk about the Jets-Colts game and what happened there. And then we'll also talk about the Broncos and their impressive win over the Falcons. And, you know, they're a dangerous team. That's another team in the AFC West that you got to watch out for, and another team that I was wrong about going into the season. So, with that being said, let's get into the first topic, which is talking about the Texans-Cowboys game. So, obviously, you know, when I talked about this game beforehand, there wasn't really a lot of juice going into it. Of course, with Dak Prescott being ruled out for the season, and the Cowboys are just not having a good year. Also, the Texans, you know, they got out of the gate strong to start the year, but they've kind of been struggling as of late, so they've been looking to kind of get things right. They did get Nico Collins back last night, which was big. He made some big plays. He actually had a long touchdown that got called back. That was, I think, the first drive of the game. But he looked good, and that's important because, you know, he's a big weapon for them, and, you know, they're already without Stephon Diggs for the rest of the year. So getting him back is huge. And, of course, you still have Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz and Joe Mixon, who we will talk about in a second as well. So, but this was a get-right game for them. And we also have Anthony Manzano in the chat saying, if this continues happening with the Cowboys, is McCarthy done? Or do you think because he is basically a yes man for Jerry Jones, he's not going to get fired? Well, he is on an expiring contract. So he's not necessarily going to get fired. It's more of just they're going to part ways, which is most likely going to happen. McCarthy is, I would think, is not coming back. But then again, you could look at Jason Garrett and how long he was there as the head coach. And maybe, you know, the Cowboys say, well, you know, we had a ton of injuries this year. Dak, of course, got ruled out for the year. So then maybe you give McCarthy another contract. But I'm leaning towards McCarthy is gone because there's other candidates out there that maybe the Cowboys would be inclined to try to bring in, like a Bill Belichick, which I hope they don't do. I don't want to see Belichick go to the Cowboys, but it's definitely a possibility, especially with the relationship that Jerry Jones and Bill Belichick have, which I really didn't think was a thing until really this year. So he's saying no. That's what I'm saying is, do you think Jerry rehires him and signs them into another extension because he does everything Jerry wants him to do? I mean, even with that, I still don't think so. I think you got to make some changes. I mean, would it surprise me if that ends up being the case? No. But I think it's more likely that McCarthy's not back. The Cowboys have to make changes. And if they don't, well, then you're going to expect a season similar to this one, even with Dak Prescott coming back. And even when Dak was playing, the Cowboys weren't doing good. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I don't think that he's coming back. I think there's going to be a change there. But we'll see what happens. But to kind of go through this game, so it was close at one point, but the Texans kind of pulled away, which I kind of figured. They were the much better team here. But, yeah, so in the beginning, The Texans, like I said, they went right down the field to start the game. They went 6 plays, 77 yards. Like I said, there was a 77-yard touchdown by Nico Collins, but that got called back, unfortunately, for an ineligible man downfield, and that was on Larry Tunsil, their tackle. Then on the second play, there was a defensive holding, and then the Texans began moving the ball. He had 7 yards to Robert Woods, 8 yards to Dalton Schultz, 16 yards to John Mechie, and then Joe Mixon from 45 yards out scores a touchdown. He had a great night for the Texans, and he's going to be a big player for them down the stretch here and into the postseason, I believe. Then the Cowboys got the ball, their first drive of the game. They ended up turning it over on downs. They did a fake punt, and it only went for 4 yards. But then it didn't lead to anything for the Texans, because then C.J.Stroud, they went for it on 4th and 3, and he ends up throwing a pick, trying to hit Nico Collins. But then Cooper Rush ends up throwing a pick, picked off by Derek Stingley, and then that led to another Texans touchdown, the second Joe Mixon touchdown of the game, so that made it 14-0. And then the Cowboys, they scored a touchdown on their next drive. Cooper Rush connected with Kevontae Turpin for a 64-yard touchdown. There was a penalty on the play, and initially we thought it was going to be on Dallas, but it ended up being on the Texans. It was a legal use of hands penalty, which of course was declined. So that made it 14-7. Then the Texans on their next drive, you had a Kymie Fairbairn field goal. That was from 33 yards out. And then the Cowboys responded with the field goal drive. Brandon Aubrey, 53-yard field goal. Texans punted. And then Aubrey actually missed a field goal. It was a 40-yarder, but he kind of slipped on it, so that was probably why he ended up missing it. But that was such a surprise because he's automatic. And, of course, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are saying that was a collective jinx, that we're not fully responsible for that, because they were talking about how he's just automatic. But, yeah, that was his first miss at home, I believe. Then the Texans punted, and then the Cowboys, they got the ball and they turned it over on downs. But that was, at the end of the half, that was the last play. So then the Texans in the third quarter, they put up 3 points. That was a Kymie Fairbairn 29-yard field goal. Cowboys turned it over on downs. And then the Texans punted. Then the Cowboys fumbled. Cooper Rush ended up getting sacked and fumbled the ball. It was covered by Derek Barnett, the former Philadelphia Eagle. And that ended up being taken to the house. Actually, yeah, it was recovered by Barnett, and he scored from 28 yards out. So that made it 27-10. And then more punts. Cowboys turned it over on downs again. And then Joe Mixon once again scored from 1 yard out. And that was it. The Texans, offensively, C.J.Stroud went 23 of 34 for 257 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Joe Mixon, 20 carries for 109 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was the player of the game. Had a great game. And like I said, he's going to be a big player for them going forward here. He has been the whole year. But this is a dimension of the Texans that we didn't really see last year. And now with Joe Mixon, Devin Singletary was good for them last year, but I feel like Mixon's definitely been better. So, he's going to be big for them. And, especially when you have to go on the road. They got some tough games later on in the season against Kansas City, especially. And Joe Mixon has played in some big games with the Bengals and Arrowhead. So, he's going to be a player that they're really going to need to use. And then the other thing, too, is getting Nico Collins back is huge. Both him and Tank Dell, the same stats, same exact stats. 7 targets, 4 receptions for 54 yards. Mixon also had 2 receptions for 44 yards as well. Derek Stingley Jr. had a pick. And the Texans' defense, 5 sacks of Cooper Rush as well. And then Cooper Rush, 354 yards passing, but he did throw the ball 55 times, 32 of 55. He had 1 touchdown and 1 pick. Once again, the Cowboys struggled to run the football, also partly because they were down. But Rico Dowdle, only 28 yards on the ground. You had Deuce Vaughn. He had 13 yards on the ground. Ezekiel Elliott, 1 for 8. Was really not used at all. CeeDee Lamb had 8 receptions for 93 yards. Kevontae Turpin, 3 for 86 and a touchdown. Cowboys defense, 1 sack of Stroud in the game. But Cowboys season continues to go downhill. And, again, I don't really know. There are definitely games that they can win coming up on the schedule, but, it would not be surprising if they just lost out. And again, I mean, if you win 3 games, I don't know how you bring back Mike McCarthy. But like I said, it could be, well, we had injuries, but still, I think there has to be changes with the Cowboys. And then as for the Texans, that was a get right game for them, especially coming off of that loss against the Lions where they should have won. This was a get right game for them. And then you got the Titans coming up at home, divisional game, but I think they should win that. Then you're at Jacksonville, which we'll see what happens there. Another divisional game. And then you got that 3-game stretch with out of the bye. You got the Dolphins at home, the Chiefs, and then you got the Ravens on Christmas. So it's going to be interesting down the stretch here. But the Texans right now, they're the 4 seed, and I feel like that's where they're going to stay. The Chiefs and the Bills are going to be battling it out for the 1, and then we'll see what happens with the Steelers. I'm still not guaranteeing them winning the AFC North yet. They are definitely going to make the playoffs, as it seems, but I'm not going to guarantee them the division just yet, because they do play the Ravens again. You got the Chiefs on the schedule. You also got the Eagles as well. So there's some tough games coming up for them. But, we'll see. But the Texans right now, it's either going to be the 4 or maybe you have that chance of moving up a spot. But they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to win the division. And, just because I said that, now I'm going to jinx them. But like I said, that was a get-right game for them. And, we'll see how they look down the stretch. I would like to see C.J.Stroud play a little bit better. I think, having Nico Collins back, if that touchdown doesn't get called back, his numbers look better, of course. But, yeah, we'll see we will see. But this is a good team. They got a good defense. So, C.J. Stroud, like I said, if he plays a little bit better now, you got Nico Collins back. They are a dangerous team, even with him not putting up massive numbers. So, but let me know what you guys think about this game. What were your takeaways from it? Let me know in the comments. So we are going to take our first break of the show, and then when we come back, we will discuss the Giants and the benching of Daniel Jones. Tommy DeVito will be starting going forward. So we'll get into that when we return. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.